Larded with this was a desperation as strong as the will to survive. If Frenier died in the duel, the plantation would collapse. Its fragile economy, a life of splendor based on the perennial mortgaging of the next year's crop, was in his hands alone. So you can imagine the panic and misery in the Frenier household the night that the son went to town to fight the appointed duel. And now picture Lestat gnashing his teeth like a comic opera devil because he was not going to kill the young Frenier. You mean, then, that you felt for the Frenier women? I felt for them totally, said the vampire. Their position was agonizing, and I felt for the boy, that the night he locked himself in his father's study and made a will. He knew full well that if he fell under the rapier at 4 a.m. the next morning, his family would fall with him. He deplored his situation, and yet he could do nothing to help it. To run out on the duel would not only mean social ruin for him, but would probably have been impossible. The other young man would have pursued him until he was forced to fight. When he left the plantation at midnight, he was staring into the face of death itself, with the character of a man who was only having one path to follow, has resolved to follow it with perfect courage. He would either kill the Spanish boy or die. It was unpredictable. Despite all his skills, his face reflected a depth of feeling and wisdom I'd never seen on the face of any of Lestat's struggling victims. I had my first battle with Lestat then and there. I prevented him from killing the boy for months, and now he meant to kill him before the Spanish boy could. We were on horseback, racing after the young Frenier towards New Orleans. Lestat bent over taking him. I bent on overtaking Lestat. Well, the duel, as I told you, was scheduled for 4 a.m. on the edge of the swamp just beyond the city's northern gate, and arriving there just shortly before 4, he had a precious little time to return to Pont de Lac, which meant on our own lives were in danger. I was incensed at Lestat as never before, and he was determined to get the boy, give him his chance. I was insisting getting a hold of Lestat before he could approach the boy. It was midwinter, bitter cold and damp in the swamps, one volley of icy rain after another sweeping the clearing where the duel was to be fought. Of course, I did not fear these elements in the sense that you might. They did not numb me nor threaten me with mortal shivering or illness, but vampires feel cold as acutely as humans, and the blood of the kill is often the rich, sensual alleviation of that cold. But what concerned me that morning was not the pain I felt, but the excellent cover of darkness these elements provided, which made Frenier extremely vulnerable to Lestat's attack. All he needed to do was to be step away from his two friends towards the swamp, and Lestat might take him. And I so physically grappled with Lestat. I held him, but towards all this you had detachment, distance. The vampire sighed. Yes, sort of. I had it, and with it a supremely resolute anger. To glut himself upon the life of an entire family was to me Lestat's supreme act of utter contempt and disregard for all he should have seen with a vampire's depth. So I held him in the dark, where he spit at me and cursed at me and young Frenier, took his rapier from his friend, and second, and went out on the slick wet grass to meet his opponent. There was a brief conversation when the duel commenced. In moments it was over. Frenier had mortally wounded the other boy with a swift thrust to the chest, and he knelt in the grass, bleeding, dying, shouting something unintelligible at Frenier. The victor simply stood there. Everyone could see there was no sweetness in the victory. Frenier looked on death as if it were an abomination. His companions advanced with their lanterns, urging him to come away as soon as possible and leave the dying man to his friends. Meantime, the wounded one would allow no one to touch him. And then, as Frenier's group turned to go, the three of them walking heavily towards their horses, the man on the ground drew a pistol. Perhaps I alone could see this in the powerful dark, but in any event, I shouted to Frenier as I ran towards the gun, and this was all that Lestat needed. While I was lost in my clumsiness, distracting Frenier and going for the gun itself, Lestat, with his years of experience and superior speed, grabbed the young man and spirited him to the cypresses. I doubt his friends even knew what happened. The pistol had gone off, the wounded man had collapsed, and I, tearing through the near frozen marshes, shouted for Lestat. And then I saw him. Frenier lay sprawled over the knobbed roots of the cypress, his boots deep in the murky water, and Lestat was still bent over him, one hand on the hand of Frenier that still held the foil. I went to pull Lestat off, and the right hand swung at me with such lightning speed I did not see it, and I did not know it had struck me until I found myself in the water also. And of course, by the time I recovered, Frenier was dead. I saw him as he lay there, his eyes closed, his lips utterly still, as if he were just sleeping. "Damn you!" I began cursing at Lestat, and then I started for the body of Frenier and had begun to slip down into the marsh. The water rose over his face, covered him completely. Lestat was jubilant. He reminded me tersely that we had less than an hour to get back to Pont de Lac, and he swore revenge on me. If I didn't like the life of a southern planter, I'd finish you tonight. I know a way, he threatened me. I ought to drive your horse into the swamps. You'd have to dig yourself a hole and smother. He rode off. Even over all these years, I feel that anger for him like a white-hot liquid filling my veins. I saw then what being a vampire meant to him. He was just a killer, the boy said, his voice reflecting some of the vampire's emotion. No regard for anything. No. Being a vampire for him meant revenge. Revenge against life itself. Every time he took a life, it was revenge. It was no wonder then that he appreciated nothing. The nuances of vampire existence weren't even available to him because he was focused with a maniacal vengeance upon the mortal life he'd left. Consumed with the hatred, he looked back. Consumed with envy, nothing pleased him unless he could take it from others. And once having it, he grew cold and dissatisfied, not loving the thing for itself, and so he went after something else. Vengeance, blind and sterile and contemptible. But I've spoken to you about the Frenier sisters. It was almost 5:30 when I reached their plantation. Dawn would come shortly after 6, but I was almost home. I slipped onto the upper gallery of their house and saw them all gathered in the parlor. They had never even dressed for bed. The candles burnt low, and they sat already as mourners, waiting for the word. They were all dressed in black, as was their at-home custom, and in the dark, the black shapes of their dresses massed together with their raven hair, so that in the glow of the candles their faces appeared as 5 soft, shimmering apparitions, each uniquely sad, each uniquely courageous. Babette's face alone appeared resolute. It was as if she had already made up her mind to take the burdens of the Freniere if her brother died, and she had that same expression on her face now, which had been on her brother's when he mounted to leave for the duel. What lay ahead of her was nearly impossible. What lay ahead was the final death of which Lestat was guilty. So I did something then which caused me a great risk. I made myself known to her. I did this by playing the light. As you can see, my face is very white and has a smooth, highly reflective surface, rather like that of a polished marble. Yes, the boy nodded and appeared flustered. It's very beautiful, actually, said the boy. I wondered if... But what happened? You wonder if I was a handsome man when I was alive, said the vampire. The boy nodded. I was. Nothing structurally is changed in me, only I never knew that I was handsome. Life whirled about me a wind of petty concerns, as I've said. I gazed at nothing, not even a mirror, especially not a mirror with a free eye. But this is what happened. I stepped near to the pane of glass and let the light touch my face, and as I did, at a moment when Babette's eyes were turned towards the panes, then I appropriately vanished. Within seconds, all the sisters knew a strange creature had been seen, a ghost-like creature, and the 2 slave maids steadfastly refused to investigate. I waited out these moments impatiently for that which I wanted to happen. Babette finally took a candelabrum from a side table, lit the candles, and scornfully, everyone's fear, ventured out onto the cold gallery alone to see what was there. Their sisters hovering the door like great black birds, one of them crying that the brother was dead and she had indeed seen his ghost. Of course, you must understand that Babette, being as strong as she was, never once attributed what she saw to imagination or ghosts. I let her come to the length of the dark gallery before I spoke to her, and even then I let her see only the vague outline of my body beside one of the columns. Tell your sisters to go back, I whispered to her. I come to tell you of your brother. Do as I say. She was still for an instant, and then she turned to me and strained to see me in the dark. I only have little time. I would not harm you for the world, I said. And she obeyed, saying it was nothing, and she told them to shut the door, and they obeyed as people obey who not only need a leader, but are desperate for one. Then I stepped into the light of Babette's candles. The boy's eyes were wide. He put his hand to his lip. Did you look to her, as you do to me? He asked. You ask with such innocence, said the vampire. Yes, I suppose I certainly did. Only by candlelight. I always had a less supernatural appearance. and I made no pretense with her of being an ordinary creature. I have only minutes, I told her once, but I have to tell you is of the greatest importance. Your brother fought bravely and won the duel. But wait, you must know now he is dead. Death was the proverbial with him, the thief in the night, about which all his goodness or courage could do nothing. But this is not the principal thing which I came to tell you. It is this: you can rule the plantation, and you can save it. All that is required is that you let no one convince you otherwise. You must assume his position despite any outcry, any talk of convention, any talk of propriety or common sense. You must listen to nothing. The same land is here now that was here yesterday morning when your brother slept above. Nothing has changed. You must take his place. If you do not, the land is lost and the family is lost. You will be 5 women on a small pension, doomed to live but half or less of what life could give you. Learn what you must know. Stop at nothing until you have the answers, and take my visitation to you to be your courage whenever you waver. You must take the reins of your own life. Your brother is dead. I could see by her face that she had heard every word. She would have questioned me had there been time, but she believed me when I said there was not. Then I used all my skill to leave her so swiftly I appeared to vanish. From the garden I saw her face above in the glow of her candles. I saw her search the dark for me, turning around, and then I saw her make the sign of the cross and walk back to her sisters within. The vampire smiled. There was absolutely no talk on the river coast of any strange apparition to Babette Fenier, but after the first morning and sad talk of the women left all alone, she became the scandal of the neighborhood because she chose to run the plantation on her own. She managed an immense dowry for her younger sister and was married herself in another year. And Lestat and I almost never exchanged words. Did he go on living at Pont de Lac? Yes. I could not be certain. He'd told me all I needed to know, and in my great pretense was necessary. My sister was married in my absence, for example, while I had malarial chill, and something similar overcame me in the morning of my mother's funeral. Meantime, Lestat and I sat down to dinner each night with the old man and made nice noises with our knives and forks, which he told us to eat everything on our plates and not to drink our wine too fast. With dozens of miserable headaches, I would receive my sister in darkened bedrooms, the covers up to my chins. I bid her and her husband to bear with the dim light on account of the pain in my eyes, as I entrusted to them large amounts of money to invest for us all. Fortunately, her husband was an idiot, a harmless one, but an idiot, the product of 4 generations of marriages between first cousins. But though these things went well, we began to have our problems with the slaves. They were the suspicious ones, and I vindicated Lestat killed anyone and everyone he chose, so there was always some talk of mysterious death on the part of the coast. But it was what they saw of us which began the talk, and I heard it one evening when I was playing a shadow about the slave cabins. Now let me explain the first character of these slaves. It was only about 1795 Lestat and I lived there for 4 years in relative quiet. I investing the money which he had acquired, increasing our lands, purchasing apartments and townhouses in New Orleans, which I rented, the work of the plantation itself producing little more a cover for us than an investment. I say our, this is wrong. I never signed anything over to Lestat. As you realize, I was still legally alive, But in the 1795, these slaves did not have the character which you would have seen in films and novels of the South. They were not soft-spoken, brown-skinned people in drab rags who spoke in an English dialect. These were Africans, and they were islanders. That is, some of them had come from Santo Domingo. They were very black and totally foreign. They spoke in their African tongues, and they spoke the French patois. And when they sang African songs, which made the fields exotic and strange, always frightening to me in my immortal life. They were superstitious and had their own secrets and traditions. In short, they had not yet been destroyed as Africans completely. Slavery was the curse of their existence, but they had not been robbed yet of that which had been characteristically theirs. They tolerated the baptism and modest garments imposed on them by the French Catholic laws, but in the evenings they made their cheap fabrics into alluring costumes, made jewelries of animal bones and bits of discarded metal, which they polished to look like gold. And the slave cabins of Pont de Lac were a foreign country, an African coast after dark, in which not even the coldest overseer would want to wander. No fear for the vampire. Not until one summer evening, when passing for a shadow, I heard through the open doors of the black foreman's cottage a conversation which convinced me that Lestat and I slept in real danger.